Hello again, it's Coach Robert. I'm continuing my series on chess studies since I really like chess studies. I think maybe I like chess studies even more than actually playing chess. So, for those of you who don't know, a study is a composed position, which means it was made up by someone, it didn't really happen in a game. And one of the only constraints on what form a chess study takes is generally the material on the board should be as minimal as possible. There shouldn't be any superfluous pieces for a truly great chess study. There are even competitions for the best chess studies. You can also be awarded titles in chess from making the most beautiful, awesome studies. Here's one such study. This is obviously white to play because the white king's blushing. He's in check. Black's last move was rook f3 check. One of the reasons that I like this study so much is that sometimes my students will complain like, oh, this is too easy, chess is too easy, and I can whip out this study and really bother them, because usually when people are complaining that chess is too easy, it means like they're not really thinking that much about what's going on. They're just making their first impulse decision routinely, and this puzzle really defies your first impulse if you're a chess beginner. So your first impulse is probably to take the rook, right? Because we learned that one of the best ways to get out of check is to capture. But in this case, if you capture the rook, something bad happens. So if you're not already sure, feel free to pause the video and think about why we might not want to play pawn takes f3. The reason, as you may have guessed already, is stalemate. If we take this rook, it's stalemate. The meaning of stalemate is you don't have any moves that you can play and it's your turn. It doesn't matter how many pieces you have. You can even stalemate with every single piece on the board as long as none of your pieces are able to move. In this case, we can't move the pawn because it's blocked by white's pawn on b6. And the black king can't move because if they go on either of these squares, they would be in danger. And in chess, you're not allowed to put your king in danger. So pawn takes f3 leads to stalemate. And since white's position is overwhelming, we have multiple great threats like rook to h8 or c8 making a queen or a rook. We wouldn't really like to get a stalemate that easily. However, it turns out that it's quite difficult to avoid the stalemate. This study is rather difficult. I saw this for the first time when I was teaching in a camp together with Ganguly and Harikrishna. I was in a separate group from them, but we were all teaching together in the same camp for Kings and Queens Chess Academy. And I kind of just walked in as they were showing the answer for this puzzle. So I didn't really have all the time to think about it myself when I first saw it, but I was very impressed with the answer. So you may want to pause and take as long as half an hour to solve this study, depending on your degree of interest. Generally, if you want to improve, you should make your best effort to solve something before you turn on the engine to analyze it or hear the answer if someone is about to tell you like me. So take some time, think it over, put some real effort into it if you really want to improve. Okay, so there are several things that you can try. The most obvious thing that you could try is to just run away with the king. But this just demonstrates black's idea. If you try a move like king a2, they really want you to take the rook, right? Because if they have a rook, it's not stalemate, and since they're losing so badly, stalemate is their best chance. So they'll play rook a3 check. It's the only check, so they have to play it. If you take, it's stalemate already for the same reasons that we just mentioned. King can't move, pawn can't move, stalemate. You could try to run, but you can't hide. This rook is determined to give itself up, which I found extremely amusing the first time that I saw this. Eventually you're going to have to take it. Even if you try running the other way, it's to no avail. The way that you can figure this out easily without wasting lots of time and energy calculating variations is you try to imagine what square you could possibly put the king on where they can't check you, and there isn't any square like that. For instance, if you start running over here, I guess this is the most precise way, but it doesn't matter. If you try to run in front of your pawn, eventually they will just... Maybe this is not even the best move. Maybe they should just check like this. Just any check is good, because you'll eventually have to get into a threefold repetition. You'll eventually go back to where you came from, or you'll hit a 50 move draw. The 50 move draw kicks in when you've made 50 moves in a row that are not a pawn move or a capture. If you make any pawn move or any capture, The 50 move timer goes all the way back to 0. So it's pretty clear this is going to happen. They can check your king 50 times without any capture, because any capture leads to stalemate, and any pawn move would be illegal since they would be in check, unless it's a capture. So running out in the open doesn't help, and running back behind your wall of pawns doesn't help. And this immediately suggests that you have to make some combination of pawn moves. But what pawn moves exactly is tricky, because if you play e3, those take you. If you play d3, they'll take you. If you play c3, they'll take you. If you play b3, guess what? They'll take you. And eventually we'll see some kind of repetition. Like that. So we have to be more clever. We can give up some number of these pawns. b3 you can rule out, because they'll play rook takes b3. So that leaves just c3, d3, and e3. c3 is already interesting, because after c3 you can start running for some time. You can go over here, and then they only have one way to check you again and again. However, they'll eventually come out and check you like this. So this raises the natural question, what happens if you block with e3? This is much more interesting, because after rook takes e3, you can play d3 or c3. c3 is the best, because after rook takes c3, you can do this thing where you run between the pawns. If you had played d3, they would take that, and then you wouldn't have any such chance. Like, for example, once you go here, they now have a luxurious choice of checks. So that's a step in the wrong direction. That's why it has to be only c3 here. So after c3, they'll take it, of course, because they have no other choice. Otherwise, you win the game. For example, if they play like rook to e8, it's a solid move, but white is up so many pawns, they'll just win the game in any fashion. Like, maybe they'll just start advancing one pawn, something like that. So they have to take. And after king a2, we do this funny thing where we're playing like Ring Around the Rosie or something. The king is running in and out, the rook is pursuing. At each step, the rook has only one option. Now here's the critical moment. They can only play rook takes g3. And this leads to an important transformation in the position. After rook takes g3, there's now nothing blocking this rook. Rook captures become possible. So this is very interesting. After they run over here, back the way they came, after this final check, we don't have to play pawn takes a3 stalemate, or king takes a3 stalemate, or king b1, eventually leading to a repetition. We can play rook takes a3 checkmate. An outstanding 16-move checkmate involving various sacrifices and black constantly begging for you to take their rook. It goes against almost everything that you'll see in chess in an actual game. Although elements of this do appear. I've seen several games since I first saw this study where one side is desperately trying to get rid of one piece in order to stalemate, and there are even some classic examples. But this is like the extreme version, where you have to sacrifice lots of pawns, and then make lots of funny king moves, and I really like the geometry of running around these pawns like this, zigzagging in and out, in order to force them to clear the way for the rook. It's just very clever. And chess studies are like this routinely, so even if you don't like playing chess, you might enjoy solving studies like this. They're very creative, very amusing. Some of them are not even based around the concept of checkmating. Some studies are just very, very creative and different. So, I hope you guys like this video. If you like it, stay tuned. I do a lot of stuff like this live, and I'm going to be putting out a couple more videos with some of my favorite studies. Until next time, take care. Good luck with your chess studies.